The privileged halls of Riverside Academy hold two dangerous assumptions: that a black child must be lying about his Pentagon father, and that elite schools are beyond the reach of national threats. Both illusions shatter on Parents' Day. As Miss Whitaker's condescending smile freezes on her face, David Coleman enters the classroom not as the janitor or clerk they imagined, but as the strategic mind that safeguards a nation. His son, Aiden, watches silently, vindication eclipsed by dawning fear. Because his father isn't just there to prove a point. He's there to neutralize the breach that followed him into a school where no one believed the truth until it walked through the door wearing a security clearance higher than their imagination could reach. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Aiden Coleman struggled to keep his hands from shaking as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. The dark blue fabric felt too tight around his neck, like it was choking him. Every morning was the same ritual. Wake up, put on the Riverside Academy uniform, and prepare for another day of not quite fitting in. Aiden, breakfast is ready, his father's voice called from downstairs. Coming, Dad, Aiden replied, taking one last look at his reflection. At 10 years old, he was already learning how to wear two faces. The confident one he showed his parents, and the cautious one he needed at school. Downstairs, David Coleman sat at the kitchen table, reading something on his tablet. His father always looked impressive, even in casual clothes. There was something about the way he carried himself, straight-backed, alert, eyes that missed nothing. Got everything ready for today? David asked, sliding a plate of eggs and toast across the table. Aiden nodded, sitting down to eat. Yeah, Miss Whitaker assigned us to talk about our parents' jobs today. David raised an eyebrow. Is that so? I'm going to tell them about your work at the Pentagon, Aiden said, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. His father gave him a measured look. Just remember what I always tell you. I know, Aiden interrupted with a smile. Some things are safer if you don't say too much. Smart boy, David said, ruffling Aiden's short hair. Now eat up, we've got to leave in 10 minutes. Riverside Academy stood like a fortress of brick and privilege in one of Washington, D.C.'s most affluent neighborhoods. The school had educated the children of politicians, diplomats, and business leaders for generations. Its high iron gates and manicured lawns screamed exclusivity. Aiden climbed out of his father's modest sedan, immediately spotting the line of luxury cars dropping off his classmates. He straightened his shoulders, grabbed his backpack, and gave his dad a quick wave. Have a good day, David called. Remember what I said. Got it, Dad, Aiden replied, turning toward the imposing building. As he walked through the halls, Aiden felt the familiar feeling of being watched. Not with outright hostility, but with something almost worse, curiosity tinged with doubt. As if his very presence there was a question mark. Aiden. A friendly voice broke through his thoughts. Caleb Turner jogged up beside him, his red hair disheveled as always. Ready for Miss Whitaker's class? Aiden grinned at his best friend. Unlike most of the kids at Riverside, Caleb never made him feel like an outsider. I guess. Are you talking about your dad's job today? Caleb's smile faltered slightly. Yeah, not much to say though. Dad's still at the factory, same as always. They walked into Miss Whitaker's classroom together, taking their usual seats near the back. The room was already buzzing with excitement as students compared notes on their presentations. My dad just closed a merger worth $50 million, bragged Tyler Whitman, a blond boy whose father owned half the real estate in Northern Virginia. Well, my mom met with 3 senators yesterday, countered Sophia Green. Not to be outdone, Miss Whitaker swept into the room exactly as the bell rang. She was tall and elegant, with honey blonde hair swept into a perfect bun and clothes that screamed designer labels. At 45, she was considered one of Riverside's most respected teachers, a 20-year veteran who had taught the children of 2 former presidents. Good morning, class, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone perfect, warm on the surface, but with steel underneath. I trust you're all prepared for today's presentations. Her gaze swept the room, lingering a moment longer on Aiden and Caleb than on the others. Aiden had noticed this before, how Miss Whitaker seemed to expect less from them. With other students, she pushed and challenged. With Aiden, her voice often took on a patronizing tone, as if she were speaking to someone much younger. We'll go in alphabetical order by last name, Miss Whitaker announced, consulting her tablet. Coleman, that means you're first. Aiden's stomach dropped. He hadn't expected to go first. Taking a deep breath, He made his way to the front of the classroom, 24 pairs of eyes following his every move. "My name is Aiden Coleman," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "My presentation is about my dad's job." "Speak up, Aiden," Miss Whitaker instructed, her tone suggesting she'd already found his performance lacking. Aiden cleared his throat and continued, louder this time. My dad's name is David Coleman, and he works at the Pentagon." The room fell silent for a split second before a snicker broke out from Tyler's corner. It spread like wildfire until half the class was giggling behind their hands. Miss Whitaker didn't silence them. Instead, a smug smile played at her lips. "The Pentagon? Aiden, really?" Aiden nodded, confused by the response. "Yes, ma'am. He's worked there for 8 years." "Oh my," Miss Whitaker said with exaggerated interest. "And what does he do there? Is he the president too?" She turned toward the class with a theatrical wink that sent them into another fit of laughter. Aiden felt heat rising in his cheeks. "No, ma'am, he works in security operations. I'm sure he does," Miss Whitaker interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "Perhaps next time we can stick to the truth rather than trying to impress everyone." Aiden stood frozen at the front of the room. "But I am telling the truth," he insisted, his voice growing smaller. "You may sit down now, Aiden," Miss Whitaker said firmly. "We have a lot of presentations to get through today." As Aiden returned to his seat, his legs felt like lead. The sniggering continued around him, and he could hear Tyler whispering, "Pentagon? Yeah, right. Probably the janitor." From beside him, Caleb's hand shot up. "Ma'am, Aiden isn't lying. I've seen his dad's ID badge." Miss Whitaker's smile tightened. "That's enough, Caleb, unless you'd like to join Aiden in detention for disrupting class." Caleb's face reddened, but he fell silent, shooting Aiden an apologetic look. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Aiden moved through his classes mechanically, the humiliation of the morning weighing on him like a physical burden. By the time the final bell rang, all he wanted was to go home and forget this day had ever happened. David was waiting in the car when Aiden emerged from school. One look at his son's face told him everything he needed to know. "Rough day?" he asked as Aiden slid into the passenger seat. "Yeah," Aiden mumbled, staring out the window. They drove in silence for a few minutes before David spoke again. "Want to talk about it?" Aiden hesitated. Then the words spilled out. "We had to talk about our parents' jobs today. I told them you work at the Pentagon, and everyone laughed at me. Even Miss Whitaker, she acted like I was making it up to sound important." David's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his voice remained calm. "I see. She made me look like a liar in front of everyone," Aiden continued, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you ever come to career day? Then maybe they'd believe me." "You know why, Aiden?" David replied. "My schedule doesn't always allow for those things." "It's not fair," Aiden said. "Everyone else's parents come to school stuff." David pulled the car into their driveway before turning to face his son. "People doubt what they don't understand, Aiden. Sometimes being underestimated can be an advantage." "How is being called a liar an advantage?" Aiden asked bitterly. Before David could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, and Aiden saw his father's expression change, instantly becoming harder, more focused. "I need to take this," David said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "Go inside and start your homework. We'll talk more later." Aiden grabbed his backpack and trudged into the house while his father remained in the car. Through the living room window, he could see David speaking intently into his phone, his free hand making sharp, decisive gestures. Later that evening, as Aiden finished his math homework at the kitchen table, he heard his father's voice from the study. The door was ajar, and David's words drifted out tense and hushed. "I understand the implications. No, that's not acceptable. We need to address this immediately." Curious, Aiden crept closer to the study door. His father rarely brought work home, and when he did, he usually kept his office door firmly closed. "I'll handle it personally," David was saying. "Yes, first thing tomorrow." Aiden quickly retreated as he heard his father ending the call. A moment later, David emerged from the study, his face grave until he spotted Aiden. Then, like flipping a switch, his expression softened. "Finished with your homework?" he asked. "Almost," Aiden replied. "Is everything okay?" David nodded. "Just some work stuff, nothing for you to worry about." Later that night, unable to sleep, Aiden got up for a glass of water. As he passed by his bedroom window, a movement outside caught his eye. Looking down at the street, he saw a black SUV parked across from their house, its engine running. Aiden watched as a man in a dark suit got out, spoke briefly into what looked like a radio on his wrist, then scanned the surrounding area before returning to the vehicle. Confused and a little frightened, Aiden went to his father's room and knocked softly. "Dad, there's a car outside. I think someone's watching our house." David, who seemed to be still awake despite the late hour, came to the window and looked out. His face betrayed no surprise. "Don't worry about it," he said, placing a reassuring hand on Aiden's shoulder. "Go back to bed." "But who are they? Why are they outside our house?" "Aiden," David said firmly, "some things are safer if you don't know. Trust me on this. Now, go to sleep." Reluctantly, Aiden returned to his room. But sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept replaying the day's humiliation, his father's mysterious phone call, and the black SUV keeping silent vigil outside their home. Morning arrived with the insistent beeping of Aiden's alarm clock. For a moment, he hoped yesterday had been just a bad dream. But the memory of Miss Whitaker's mocking smile quickly crushed that hope. Downstairs, he found a note from his father on the kitchen counter. "Had to leave early. Mrs. Holloway will drive you to school. Have a good day. Dad." It wasn't unusual for his father to leave before dawn, but today it felt like one more disappointment. Aiden had hoped to talk more about what had happened at school, maybe even convince his dad to speak with Miss Whitaker. Mrs. Holloway, their elderly neighbor who sometimes helped out when David had early meetings, arrived precisely at 7:30. She drove Aiden to school in her ancient Volvo, chatting about her garden and her grandchildren while Aiden stared out the window, barely listening. "Your father works too hard," she commented as they pulled up to Riverside Academy. "Important job, though. The country needs good men like him." Aiden perked up at this. "You know what my dad does?" Mrs. Holloway smiled mysteriously. "I've lived next door to you for 6 years, child. I notice things." Before Aiden could ask more questions, they had arrived at school and the moment was lost. Miles away, David Coleman sat in a classified meeting room deep within the Pentagon. Unlike the modest attire he wore at home, here he was dressed in a sharply tailored suit with his security badge prominently displayed. Around the table sat 6 other people, 3 military officers and 3 civilians in suits as expensive as his own. The cyber attack was sophisticated, a woman with short gray hair was saying. They targeted multiple systems simultaneously, but we believe their primary goal was access to the SCADA networks. "Any idea who's behind it?" asked a Marine colonel. To David's right, the woman replied, "Not definitively, but the code signatures match previous attacks attributed to." She was interrupted by an aide hurrying into the room. The young man leaned down to whisper something to David, whose expression immediately darkened. "When did this happen?" David asked sharply. "Just now, sir. The system flagged it because of your personal security protocols." David stood abruptly. "I need to step out. There's been an unauthorized attempt to access Riverside Academy's database." The others at the table exchanged confused glances. "Riverside Academy?" the Marine colonel repeated. "The private school. My son attends there," David said tersely. "And someone just tried to breach their security system using the same methodology as the attacks we've been tracking." Back at Riverside Academy, Aiden was trying to make himself invisible in Miss Whitaker's class. After yesterday's humiliation, the last thing he wanted was to draw attention to himself. Miss Whitaker was reviewing their presentations, lavishing praise on certain students while offering only cursory acknowledgments to others. "Tyler, your father's work in real estate development is truly shaping our city's future," she gushed. "And Sophia, how fascinating that your mother is involved in crafting healthcare policy at such a high level." When she reached Aiden's presentation, her lips curved into a patronizing smile. "Aiden, while imagination is certainly a valuable quality, remember that these presentations were meant to be factual." Several students snickered, and Aiden sank lower in his seat. From across the room, Caleb shot him a sympathetic look. After class, as they headed to lunch, Caleb tried to cheer him up. "Don't listen to her, Aiden. She's always picking favorites." "Easy for you to say," Aiden muttered. "She doesn't call you a liar in front of everyone." Caleb fell silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice small. "My dad lost his job yesterday. The factory is closing down. Mom says we might have to move if he can't find something else soon." Aiden immediately felt ashamed of his self-pity. "I'm sorry, Caleb. That's terrible." Caleb shrugged, trying to look braver than he felt. "It's fine, we'll figure it out." As they entered the cafeteria, Aiden happened to glance out the window. A woman in a trench coat stood across the street, seemingly watching the school. There was something about her stance alert, vigilant, that reminded him of his father. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing. Caleb squinted through the glass. "Looking for someone, maybe?" But as Aiden continued to watch, the woman raised what looked like a small camera and took several photos of the school building before walking away with purposeful strides. That afternoon, as David drove him home from school, Aiden found himself studying his father with new curiosity. There were things about David that had always seemed ordinary: his modest clothes, his quiet demeanor, the way he never boasted about himself. But other things suddenly stood out as unusual. The late-night phone calls, the black SUVs, the way he carefully checked their surroundings when they were in public places. "Dad," Aiden ventured, "what exactly do you do at the Pentagon?" David's eyes remained fixed on the road. "You know, I work in security operations." "But what does that mean? What do you actually do every day?" A slight smile crossed David's face. "Lots of meetings, lots of reports, not very exciting stuff." "Then why are there people watching our house sometimes?" Aiden pressed. David's smile faded. "What makes you think someone's watching our house? I saw them last night. And sometimes there are cars parked across the street with people just sitting in them. They never get out." After a long pause, David said, "Some things are safer if you don't know too much about them." "Aiden, that's not just me trying to avoid your questions. It's the truth." "But why would it be dangerous for me to know what you do?" Aiden persisted. "I didn't say dangerous," David corrected gently. "I said safer. There's a difference." Before Aiden could ask another question, his school tablet, sitting on his lap, suddenly lit up with an alert. A string of random characters flashed across the screen, then disappeared as quickly as it had come. "What was that?" David asked sharply, having glimpsed the strange text. "I don't know," Aiden said, bewildered. "Some weird message just popped up and then vanished." David's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "Let me see your tablet when we get home." Once they arrived, David spent nearly an hour examining Aiden's tablet, running what looked like diagnostic programs from his own laptop. Finally, he handed the device back. "Everything seems normal now," he said, though the crease between his eyebrows suggested otherwise. "But Aiden, listen to me carefully. If anything unusual happens at school, anything at all, I want you to call me immediately. Understand?" Aiden nodded, increasingly confused by his father's intensity. "Is something wrong, Dad?" David rested his hands on Aiden's shoulders, looking him directly in the eyes. "Probably not, but I'd rather be overly cautious than not cautious enough." The next day at school, Miss Whitaker seemed determined to continue Aiden's humiliation. As they discussed famous government buildings in Washington, D.C., she pointedly called on him when they reached the Pentagon. "Aiden, since your father supposedly works there," she said with a smirk, "perhaps you can tell us something about the Pentagon that isn't in our textbooks." The class went quiet, most students grinning in anticipation of another embarrassing moment. But Aiden had spent the evening reading everything he could find about the Pentagon, determined not to be caught off guard again. "The Pentagon has twice as many bathrooms as necessary," he said confidently. "It was built in the 1942nd when Virginia was still segregated, so they had to have separate bathrooms for white and black employees. After segregation ended, they just kept all the bathrooms." Miss Whitaker's smirk faltered slightly. She clearly hadn't expected him to have an actual answer. "Well," she said after a moment, "that's correct, though hardly relevant to our discussion of architectural significance. And it has a hot dog stand in the central courtyard that Soviet missiles supposedly targeted during the Cold War." Aiden continued, warming to his subject. "They thought it was the entrance to a secret bunker because they saw high-ranking officials going there every day, but they were just getting lunch." A few students laughed, not mockingly this time, but genuinely amused by the anecdote. Miss Whitaker's lips thinned. "That's enough, Aiden. We need to move on." But the small victory gave Aiden a boost of confidence that lasted throughout the day. As the final bell rang, Miss Whitaker called him back as the other students filed out. "Aiden," she said, her voice honey, sweet but her eyes cold, "I understand you're going through a phase where you feel the need to embellish the truth. Many children do. But continuing to insist on these Pentagon stories is becoming disruptive." "I'm not making anything up," Aiden said firmly. Miss Whitaker leaned forward, her smile never reaching her eyes. "If your father really works at the Pentagon, why not bring him in to prove it? Parents' Day is next week." That would settle everything, wouldn't it? The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. She was certain he would back down, admit to lying, or make excuses why his father couldn't attend. Instead, Aiden met her gaze steadily. Fine, he will. For a split second, uncertainty flickered across Miss Whitaker's face, but she quickly masked it with a patronizing smile. Wonderful. I look forward to meeting him. That evening, Aiden approached his father with nervous determination. David was at the kitchen table, laptop open, frowning at something on the screen. Dad? Aiden began hesitantly. There's Parents' Day at school next week. I really need you to come. David looked up, his expression distracted. Parents' Day? You know how difficult it is for me to commit to school events. End of chapter. Dad, I know, but... Aiden took a deep breath and explained the situation. Miss Whitaker's continued mockery, her challenge, the way she'd made him a laughingstock among his classmates. As Aiden spoke, David's expression gradually shifted from distracted to focused, then to something harder to read. By the time Aiden finished, his father's face had settled into a calm determination that Aiden recognized from rare occasions when David was truly angry but controlling it. I see, David said simply. He closed his laptop. What day is this? Parents' Day. Next Friday, Aiden said hopefully. Will you come? David nodded once, decisively. Yes, I'll be there. Really? Aiden couldn't hide his surprise. His father had never agreed so quickly to a school event before. Really, David confirmed. I think it's time I met your teacher. Aiden felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Finally, Miss Whitaker would see the truth. Later that night, David made another of his mysterious phone calls from his study. This time, Aiden was certain he heard his father mention Riverside Academy and security protocols before the study door closed completely. Outside, the black SUV was back, parked in the same spot as before. But now, instead of feeling frightened by its presence, Aiden found it oddly reassuring. Something was happening, something his father wasn't telling him about. But whatever it was, he was beginning to believe it might work in his favor. As he drifted off to sleep, Aiden thought about the look on Miss Whitaker's face when his father walked into that classroom. For the first time since the humiliating presentation, he found himself looking forward to going to school. The days leading up to Parents' Day crawled by with agonizing slowness. In class, Miss Whitaker had been wearing a particularly smug smile whenever she glanced at Aiden. Twice, she had made offhand comments about tall tales and vivid imaginations while looking directly at him. She thinks your dad isn't coming, Caleb whispered during their Thursday math lesson. He'll be there, Aiden replied with more confidence than he felt. Though his father had promised to attend, Aiden knew how unpredictable David's schedule could be. Just last month, he had missed Aiden's science fair because of some emergency at work. That evening at dinner, Aiden picked at his food nervously. You're still coming tomorrow, right? David looked up from his plate. I said I would be there, didn't I? Yeah, but sometimes things come up at work. Not tomorrow, David said firmly. I've already cleared my schedule. End of. Aiden nodded, relieved. Miss Whitaker doesn't believe you work at the Pentagon. She thinks I made it all up. Something flashed in David's eyes, a hardness Aiden rarely saw at home. Does she now? She's been making fun of me for it, Aiden continued. In front of everyone. David set down his fork with deliberate calm. Tell me more about Miss Whitaker. Aiden described his teacher, her favoritism toward the wealthy students, her subtle put-downs, the way she seemed to enjoy humiliating him. David listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. When Aiden finished, he simply said, I see. Later that night, Aiden noticed his father in his home office, the door partially open. David was on his laptop, but instead of financial spreadsheets or news sites, Aiden glimpsed what looked like personnel files on the screen. He caught a brief look at Miss Whitaker's photograph before David noticed him and closed the laptop. Shouldn't you be in bed? His father asked not unkindly. Just getting some water, Aiden replied, wondering what his father had been looking at and why. The next morning, Aiden woke to find his father already dressed, not in his usual work attire, but in a crisply pressed dark suit with a blue tie that seemed more formal than his everyday clothes. On the kitchen counter lay a leather portfolio and an ID badge Aiden had never seen before. Is that your Pentagon ID? Aiden asked, reaching for it. David gently moved it out of reach. Yes, and it stays with me. And Aiden noticed his father checking his watch repeatedly during breakfast, as if coordinating the timing of their departure with precision. When they finally got into the car, David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then made a brief call. "We're leaving now, ETA 20 minutes. They rode in silence for several blocks before Aiden gathered the courage to ask, "Dad, are you okay? You seem different today." David's expression softened. "I'm fine, Aiden, just focused." "So, are you mad about Miss Whitaker?" "Not mad," David replied after a moment's consideration, "but I don't appreciate anyone calling my son a liar." As they approached Riverside Academy, Aiden noticed something unusual. 3 black SUVs, identical to the one he'd seen outside their house, were parked across the street from the school. Men in dark suits stood beside them, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy morning. "Dad, who are those men?" David glanced at them briefly. "Why are they here?" "Support," David said simply, pulling into the school's visitor parking lot. As they walked toward the entrance, Aiden felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Part of him couldn't wait to see Miss Whitaker's face when his father walked in. Another part worried that somehow something would go wrong. "Don't worry," David said, as if reading his thoughts. "Everything will be fine." Inside, the school hallways were bustling with parents and students. Parents' Day at Riverside Academy was always a major event, with many families using it as an opportunity to network and forge connections. Aiden spotted Tyler's father in an expensive Italian suit, already deep in conversation with the father of another student. They checked in at the front desk, where the secretary did a double take when she saw David's ID badge. "Mr. Coleman," she said, her professional smile faltering slightly. "We weren't expecting. It's lovely to have you join us today." "Thank you," David replied politely. "Could you direct us to Miss Whitaker's classroom?" "Of course, room 112, just down that hallway on the right." As they walked, Aiden noticed other parents and staff giving them curious glances. David's badge, prominently displayed on his suit jacket, seemed to be attracting attention. "Why is everyone staring?" Aiden whispered. "People are curious about things they don't see every day," David answered. They reached room 112, where a small crowd of parents and students had already gathered. Miss Whitaker stood at the front, perfectly poised in a cream-colored blouse and navy skirt, greeting each family with practiced charm. When she spotted Aiden, a satisfied smirk crossed her face, clearly assuming he had come alone. Then her eyes shifted to David, took in his immaculate suit, his commanding presence, and finally settled on the Pentagon badge displayed on his lapel. The smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of disbelief. "Miss Whitaker," Aiden said, unable to keep a note of triumph from his voice. "This is my dad, David Coleman. He works at the Pentagon." David extended his hand. "Miss Whitaker, I've heard so much about you." She took his hand automatically, her face pale. "Mr. Coleman, welcome to Riverside Academy." "Thank you," David replied smoothly. "Aiden has told me about your interest in his presentations about my work." Miss Whitaker's composure, usually unshakable, visibly crumbled. "Yes, well, the children sometimes have such creative interpretations of their parents' careers." "Indeed," David agreed. "Though in this case, I can assure you Aiden was quite accurate." Before Miss Whitaker could respond, the classroom door opened again and a man in a dark suit stepped in. He scanned the room, spotted David, and approached with urgent purpose. "Sir," he said quietly, "there's something that requires your attention." David nodded, then turned back to Miss Whitaker. "You'll have to excuse me for a moment." "Government business?" He stepped outside with the man, leaving Aiden standing proudly beside a thoroughly discomforted Miss Whitaker. "Well," she said, attempting to regain control of the situation, "shall we begin our Parents' Day activities?" For the next half hour, Miss Whitaker led the class through presentations and discussions, though her usual confidence was noticeably diminished. She kept glancing nervously at the door where David stood in deep conversation with not one, but now 3 men in suits. Throughout the classroom, parents and students whispered among themselves, occasional glances thrown Aiden's way. For once, he wasn't being ignored or mocked. He was the center of fascinated attention. "Dude," Caleb whispered, leaning over from his desk, "your dad really does work at the Pentagon." "I told you," Aiden replied, unable to suppress a grin. Their conversation was interrupted by the classroom door opening once more. This time, it was Principal Grant who entered, looking flustered. He scanned the room, his eyes settling on Miss Whitaker. "Ah, Miss Whitaker," he said with forced cheerfulness. "I see you've met Mr. Coleman." "Yes," she replied stiffly. "We were just discussing—" "Excellent, excellent," the principal interrupted, clearly agitated. He turned to address the class. "Students, we're going to have a special presentation today. Mr. Coleman has graciously agreed to speak to us about his work with the government." Miss Whitaker's face registered shock. Clearly, this deviation from her carefully planned Parents' Day schedule had not been discussed with her. Principal Grant ushered David to the front of the classroom. "Mr. Coleman is a senior security strategist at the Pentagon," he announced, emphasizing each word as if to drive home the point to Miss Whitaker. "We're very honored to have him visit Riverside Academy today." David took his place at the front of the room, with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to speaking before much more intimidating audiences. The classroom fell silent, every eye fixed on him. "Thank you, Principal Grant," David began. "Before I start, I want to say how proud I am of my son, Aiden. He has shown remarkable resilience and character in situations that would challenge most adults." Aiden felt his chest swell with pride as his father's gaze briefly met his. "Now, I can't discuss the specifics of my work for obvious reasons," David continued, "but I can tell you a bit about what we do at the Pentagon. Contrary to what you might have seen in movies, most of our work involves planning, analysis, and prevention. Every day, dedicated professionals work to identify and neutralize threats before they become dangers." As David spoke, Aiden noticed Miss Whitaker inching toward the back of the classroom, clearly trying to make herself less conspicuous. "One thing I've learned in my career," David said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room, "is that prejudice prejudging situations or people based on assumptions rather than facts is one of the greatest barriers to effective security. When we dismiss information because it doesn't fit our preconceptions, we create blind spots, and blind spots are dangerous." Several parents shifted uncomfortably, and Miss Whitaker's face flushed red. It was clear to everyone that David's words carried a message beyond national security. "You don't always see the people protecting you," David continued, "but that doesn't mean they're not there. The most effective protection often happens without anyone realizing it was needed in the first place." A student raised his hand, Tyler, the boy who had laughed loudest at Aiden's presentation. "Yes." David acknowledged him. "Sir, have you ever been in a gunfight?" Tyler asked, his tone caught between awe and skepticism. A slight smile crossed David's face. "As I said, our goal is to resolve situations before they reach that point. But yes, I've had to face dangerous situations. The key is preparation, teamwork, and—" David stopped mid-sentence as his phone vibrated in his pocket. He checked it discreetly, his expression instantly shifting from relaxed to alert. To most in the room, the change might have been imperceptible, but Aiden recognized it immediately. It was the same look his father got when those late-night emergency calls came in. David smoothly redirected. "The key is preparation, teamwork, and constant vigilance. Speaking of which, I should check in with my team. Principal Grant, could I have a word outside?" The principal nodded, clearly surprised by the sudden interruption but unwilling to question someone of David's authority. As David stepped outside with Principal Grant, the classroom erupted in excited chatter. "Your dad is so cool," Caleb whispered to Aiden. "Did you see Miss Whitaker's face when he started talking about prejudice?" Aiden nodded. Though his attention was focused on his father through the classroom window, David was showing something on his phone to Principal Grant, whose expression had grown increasingly grave. Miss Whitaker, attempting to regain control of her classroom, clapped her hands. "All right, everyone, let's continue with our scheduled activities. Parents, if you could join your children at their desks for our next project." But her authority had been severely undermined. Parents and students alike kept glancing toward the door, waiting for David's return. After several minutes, Principal Grant re-entered alone, his face tense. He whispered something to Miss Whitaker, whose eyes widened in alarm. "Class," she said, her voice slightly higher than normal, "we're going to take a short break. Please remain in the classroom until further notice." "What's happening?" Aiden asked Caleb, a sense of unease growing in his stomach. "No idea," Caleb replied, "but your dad looked pretty serious." David Coleman stood in the hallway outside the classroom, his government-issued phone displaying an alert that made his blood run cold. "Breach detected. Riverside Academy." "How long ago?" he asked the agent who had delivered the initial warning. "We're talking minutes, sir. The cyber team detected it during routine monitoring. They flagged it immediately because of your security protocols regarding this location. David nodded grimly. He had indeed placed special monitoring on the school systems after the previous attempts to breach them, a precaution that now seemed prescient. What's the nature of the breach? Multiple entry points, sir. They hit the security cameras first, then the door locking mechanisms. It has all the hallmarks of the group we've been tracking. David's jaw tightened. For months, his team had been monitoring a sophisticated foreign intelligence cell operating on American soil. Their usual targets were defense contractors and government facilities, not private schools. The fact that they had suddenly shifted focus to Riverside Academy couldn't be coincidence. "Get me Agent Morales," he ordered, "and implement security protocol Omega for this building." As the agent hurried to comply, Principal Grant approached, his face a mask of poorly concealed panic. "Mr. Coleman, what exactly is happening? Should we evacuate the building?" "No," David replied firmly. "For now, everyone stays put. I need you to initiate a soft lockdown. Keep all students and staff in their current locations. Doors closed but not barricaded. Make it sound routine like a drill." "Can you do that?" The principal nodded uncertainly. "Yes, but..." "Good, do it now, please." 1. As Grant hurried toward the main office, David saw a familiar figure entering the school's main doors. FBI agent Maria Morales, the mysterious woman in the trench coat Aiden, had spotted watching the school days earlier. "Coleman," she greeted him with a curt nod. "Quite a coincidence, you being here today." "I don't believe in coincidences," David replied, "especially not when my son's school is targeted by the same group we've been tracking for months." Morales' expression hardened. "We have reason to believe there's a threat inside this building. The cyber intrusion is likely just the first step." "Are people in position?" David asked. She nodded. "Perimeter is secure. We've got teams covering all exits." "Good, let's..." David's response was cut short by the school's PA system crackling to life. "Attention all students and staff," Principal Grant's voice announced, remarkably steady, considering the circumstances. "We are initiating a precautionary lockdown procedure. Please remain in your current locations with doors closed until further notice. This is not a drill, but there is no cause for alarm." "No cause for alarm," Morales muttered under her breath. "That always works." David was already moving back toward Miss Whitaker's classroom. "I need to get back to my son." Inside the classroom, the announcement had generated precisely the kind of nervous tension Grant had hoped to avoid. Parents were checking their phones. Students were whispering among themselves. And Miss Whitaker stood frozen at the front of the room, clearly unsure how to proceed. David entered and immediately took control of the situation. "Everyone, please remain calm. This is a standard security precaution." "What's happening, Mr. Coleman?" one of the parents demanded. "Are our children in danger?" "Right now, the best thing everyone can do is stay calm and follow instructions," David replied evenly. "Miss Whitaker, please make sure all blinds are closed and the door is locked." The teacher moved to comply, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the blinds. David noticed Tyler's father, Mr. Whitman, watching him suspiciously. "Is this related to your presence here today?" Whitman asked accusingly. "Have you brought some sort of threat to our children?" Before David could respond, Miss Whitaker surprisingly came to his defense. "Mr. Whitman, please. Mr. Coleman is clearly helping to ensure our safety." David gave her a brief nod of thanks before addressing the room. "I understand everyone's concern. Please trust that we have security personnel throughout the building. The lockdown is precautionary." He moved to where Aiden and Caleb sat, their faces showing a mixture of fear and excitement. "Dad, what's really happening?" Aiden whispered. "Just a security concern we're addressing," David replied quietly. "I need you to help keep everyone calm, okay?" Aiden nodded, recognizing the seriousness in his father's tone. "Is it because of your work?" Aiden asked. Before David could answer, his phone vibrated again. The message was brief but alarming. "Suspicious package found in basement. AOD team en route." "I need to step out again," David told Aiden. "Stay here. Don't leave this room for any reason." As David moved toward the door, Miss Whitaker approached him. Her earlier smugness was entirely gone. "Mr. Coleman," she said softly, "should I be worried?" "Just keep everyone in this room," he replied. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Outside in the hallway, David found Agent Morales waiting for him, accompanied by 2 FBI agents in tactical gear. "EOD team is 10 minutes out," she reported. Building services found a package near the main electrical controls. They say it has wires visible. Show me, David said. They moved swiftly through the eerily quiet hallways, descending a service stairwell to the school's basement. Two more agents were already there, keeping a safe distance from a backpack propped against the wall near the electrical panel. No one's touched it? David asked. Negative. Building services supervisor spotted it during his security sweep, called it in immediately. David approached cautiously, studying the backpack without touching it. The partially unzipped top revealed what looked like circuit boards and wiring. This isn't a bomb, he said after a moment. It's a surveillance package, high-end, military grade. Someone's been monitoring this building's systems from the inside. Morales frowned. Why would foreign operatives be interested in a private school? That's what we need to find out, David replied. He turned to one of the agents. Get me the school's personnel files. Everyone who has access to this area, and I want security footage from the past week. Sir, the agent replied, the school's security system has been compromised. We don't know if the footage is intact. Then get me the backup tapes. A place like this will have physical backups. As the agents hurried to comply, David's phone buzzed with another message. This one sent a chill down his spine. Facial recognition match on school maintenance staff, known foreign operative. Last seen near East Wing 5 minutes ago. David showed the message to Morales, whose expression darkened. The East Wing? That's where the server room is located. And where they keep student and family information, David added grimly. This isn't random, they're after something specific. Or someone, Morales suggested. The implication hung in the air between them. David's position at the Pentagon gave him access to some of the nation's most sensitive security information. A foreign intelligence operation targeting his son's school on the very day of his visit couldn't be coincidence. We need to lock down the server room, David decided. And I want all maintenance staff accounted for immediately. As they headed toward the East Wing, Principal Grant intercepted them, his earlier composure now completely gone. Mr. Coleman, parents are getting agitated. They're demanding answers. Some are threatening to leave with their children despite the lockdown. Tell them that doing so could put everyone at risk, David replied firmly. This is a matter of national security. National security at a school? Grant stammered. I need your cooperation, not your questions, David said sharply. Keep everyone where they are. We'll handle this. As Grant reluctantly departed, Agent Morales received an update through her earpiece. We've got a problem, she reported. The maintenance worker identified as the foreign operative, he's not in the East Wing. According to building services, he should be doing rounds in the West Wing right now. David felt his blood run cold. The classrooms are in the West Wing, including your son's, Morales confirmed. Without another word, they both began running toward Miss Whitaker's classroom. As they rounded the corner, David saw a man in a gray maintenance uniform outside room 112, fiddling with what appeared to be a keycard reader next to the door. FBI, don't move, Morales shouted, drawing her weapon. The man's head snapped up. For a split second, his cold, calculating eyes met David's the eyes of a trained operative. Then he bolted, running down the hallway away from them. Stay with the classroom, David called to Morales as he took off after the man. The chase led through the winding hallways of Riverside Academy, past startled teachers who had peeked out of their rooms despite the lockdown orders. The operative was fast, and he clearly knew the building's layout, taking turns and shortcuts that suggested detailed planning. David followed him down another stairwell into a service corridor that led toward the cafeteria. As they burst into the large, empty dining area, the man suddenly whirled around, a knife appearing in his hand. You should have stayed out of this, Coleman, he said in heavily accented English. Who sent you? David demanded, keeping a safe distance, his body automatically shifting into a defensive stance. The man smirked. You know who? The same people who've been watching your every move for months. Did you really think your son would be safe here? A cold fury rose in David's chest. If anything happens to my son, then you should have been more careful about where you sent him to school, the man interrupted. So many important families, so much valuable data. This place is a goldmine of intelligence. Before David could respond, the gymnasium doors behind the operative burst open. 2 FBI agents rushed in, weapons drawn. Seeing he was cornered, the operative made a desperate lunge toward David with his knife. David sidestepped the attack with the practiced ease of someone with extensive combat training. In one fluid motion, he caught the man's arm, twisted it behind his back, and forced him to the ground. It's over, he said as the agents moved in to secure the operative. Tell your handlers they picked the wrong school to target. With the immediate threat neutralized, David hurried back toward Miss Whitaker's classroom, his mind racing. If this operative had been watching the school, what was his ultimate goal? And more importantly, was he working alone? As he approached room 112, he saw Agent Morales outside the door, speaking urgently into her radio. We've got another problem, she said as David reached her. Building security just reported movement in the air ducts near the main office. And there's an unauthorized voice on the school's radio frequency. David's expression hardened. This was never about data or surveillance. It's a coordinated extraction operation. They're after one of the students, or multiple students, Morales suggested. Think about it, David finished grimly. This school has children of diplomats, government officials, defense contractors, including my son. He looked directly at her, his voice like steel. We need to get everyone out of here, now. Just as he reached for the classroom door, a muffled bang echoed through the building, followed by the immediate wail of fire alarms. Inside the classroom, panic erupted. Parents clutched their children. Students cried out in fear. And Miss Whitaker stood helplessly at the front, trying in vain to maintain order. Everyone stay calm, David called as he entered. His authoritative voice cut through the chaos, bringing a momentary hush to the room. We need to evacuate in an orderly fashion. Follow the FBI agents outside to the designated safe area. What was that explosion? Someone demanded. Likely a diversionary tactic, David replied honestly, which is why we need to move quickly but calmly. As Agent Morales began organizing the evacuation, David moved to Aiden's side. Stay right beside me, he instructed his son. No matter what happens, don't get separated. Aiden nodded, his eyes wide but remarkably steady. What about Caleb? David glanced at Aiden's friend, who looked terrified. He comes with us. Both of you hold on to my jacket and don't let go. As they joined the line of students and parents being escorted from the classroom, David noticed Miss Whitaker hanging back, seemingly frozen with indecision. Miss Whitaker, he called, come with us now. The teacher startled at his voice, then hurried to join them. I'm sorry, she whispered as they moved into the hallway. I didn't believe him. I didn't believe Aiden about you. We'll discuss that later, David replied curtly. Right now, focus on getting safely out of this building. The hallway was filling with students and staff from other classrooms, all being directed toward the nearest exits by FBI agents and local police who had responded to the alarm. Through the growing crowd, David spotted something that made his blood run cold. Another maintenance worker moving against the flow of evacuees, his hand reaching suspiciously inside his jacket. Morales, David called out, pointing toward the suspicious figure. 3 o'clock. Emb. The FBI agent reacted instantly, signaling to her team. 2 agents broke off from the evacuation line and moved to intercept the man. Seeing he'd been spotted, the operative suddenly pulled out what looked like a small remote device. Everybody down, David shouted, pulling Aiden and Caleb to the floor and shielding them with his body. Miss Whitaker dropped beside them, covering her head. Instead of an explosion, however, the school's lights suddenly went dark. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, casting the hallway in an eerie red glow. Power cut, David muttered, helping the boys back to their feet. They're trying to disable the security systems completely. The evacuation continued, now more urgent. In the dim lighting, David kept a firm grip on Aiden and Caleb as they neared the exit, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. They had almost reached the doors when a loud crash came from behind them. David turned to see the second operative engaged in a struggle with the FBI agents, knocking over a display case in the process. Glass shattered across the floor as students screamed, and parents pushed toward the exits in panic. Keep moving, David urged, guiding the boys and Miss Whitaker forward. Outside, the school grounds had been transformed into a tactical operations center. Police cars, FBI vehicles, and even military personnel created a secure perimeter around the building. Students and staff were being directed to gathering points where they were checked off against attendance records. David guided Aiden and Caleb to the nearest FBI checkpoint where Agent Morales was coordinating the response. Status? David asked her. 2 operatives in custody, 1 still unaccounted for, she reported tersely. We found surveillance equipment in the server room, the principal's office, and 3 classrooms. Including Miss Whitaker's, David asked. Morales nodded. Primary target, They've been monitoring it for at least a week, according to the equipment timestamps. Miss Whitaker, who had been standing nearby, gasped audibly. Monitoring my classroom? Why? That's what we intend to find out, David replied, looking back at the school building where FBI agents were still conducting a thorough sweep. As they stood in the relative safety of the perimeter, David noticed Aiden looking up at him with a mixture of fear, confusion, and dawning understanding. This is why you couldn't come to school events before, isn't it? Aiden asked quietly. This is what you really do. David placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Part of it? Yes. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you more. Is this because of your work? Is that why they came here? Before David could answer, a suspicious bag was carried out of the building by an FBI evidence team. As they set it down at a safe distance, David's face darkened with recognition. That's not just surveillance equipment, he said to Morales. That's a data mining package designed to extract information from secure networks, military grade, and what would they want from a school network? Morales wondered. David's expression was grim as the pieces finally came together. They weren't after the school's data. They were using the school's connection to access the home networks of government officials and defense contractors through their children's devices. Tablets, laptops, phones, all connecting to both school and home networks, creating a backdoor into otherwise secure systems. Clever, Morales concluded. Miss Whitaker, who had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, suddenly turned to Aiden. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I should have believed you about your father. Aiden, still processing the day's events, simply nodded. David checked his phone as another update came in. They've apprehended the third operative trying to escape through the service entrance. The building is secure. A collective sigh of relief passed through the gathered parents and staff. As the immediate danger receded, David found himself the center of attention, with parents approaching to thank him and ask questions. Through it all, he kept Aiden close by his side, his hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder. The look they exchanged spoke volumes, a new understanding between father and son, forged in the crucible of this extraordinary day. Principal Grant, looking considerably more disheveled than he had that morning, approached them. Mr. Coleman, I don't know how to thank you. Your quick action may have saved lives today. I was just doing my job, David replied. But if you want to thank me, you might start by ensuring all students at Riverside Academy are treated with equal respect, regardless of their background. Grant nodded earnestly, his gaze flickering briefly to Miss Whitaker, who had the good grace to look ashamed. As the emergency response continued around them, David knelt down to eye level with Aiden. You did good today, he told his son quietly. You kept your head. You stayed calm. I'm proud of you. Aiden's face brightened at the praise. Does this mean I can tell the kids at school what you really do now? David chuckled, some of the day's tension finally releasing. Some things are still safer if they stay between us, but I think they've gotten the general idea. Son. Around them, Riverside Academy would never be quite the same again, and neither would Aiden's place within it. As evening descended on Riverside Academy, the initial chaos had transformed into an organized investigation. Police taped cordoned off sections of the building, and teams of FBI agents methodically combed through classrooms and corridors. The once pristine private school now resembled a crime scene, which David reflected grimly was exactly what it had become. Most families had been cleared to leave after giving statements, but David, Aiden, and Caleb remained, along with several government officials whose children attended the school. They sat in the library, which had been designated as a secure area, while agents continued their work throughout the building. How much longer do we have to stay, Dad? Aiden asked, fatigue evident in his voice. The excitement of the day had worn off, replaced by exhaustion. Not much longer, David promised, checking his watch. Agent Morales just needs to finish processing the evidence. As if summoned by her name, Morales appeared in the library doorway, her trench coat now replaced by an FBI windbreaker. She beckoned to David, who squeezed Aiden's shoulder reassuringly before joining her. We've completed our initial assessment of the surveillance equipment, she said in a low voice. It's more sophisticated than we thought, military grade with advanced encryption protocols that match what we've seen from the core group. David's expression darkened. The Corée Group was a notorious cyber espionage collective with ties to foreign intelligence services. His team had been tracking their activities for months, but this was the first time they had targeted an American school. Any idea what their primary objective was? He asked. We're still analyzing the data, but it looks like they were gathering intelligence on multiple high-value targets through their children's school accounts. Cross-referencing student names with parents in sensitive positions. David nodded grimly. And my son? Was he on their list? Morales hesitated, which was answer enough. His name was flagged in their system, along with 7 other students whose parents work in national security, and are. A cold anger settled in David's chest. They were using children to get to their parents. It gets worse, Morales continued, leading David to a table where an evidence technician was examining what looked like an ordinary janitor's maintenance cart. We found this in the boiler room. It's not just cleaning supplies. The technician carefully lifted a false bottom in the cart, revealing a compartment containing handcuffs, zip ties, and a small case of syringes. Sedatives, Morales explained. Enough to incapacitate several children. Oh, they weren't just gathering intelligence, David realized, his voice hardening. They were planning an abduction. Leverage, Morales agreed. Take a child, force the parent to cooperate. It's an old playbook, but effective. David's jaw tightened. I want security details assigned to all the targeted families. And I want round-the-clock protection for Aiden until we've neutralized this threat completely. Already arranged, Morales assured him. But there's something else you should see. She led him to another table where a laptop displayed security footage from the school. We retrieved this from the backup servers. Watch the janitor, the one who grabbed your son. David leaned in, watching as the footage showed Aiden following the disguised operative down to the boiler room. His parental instincts flared with protective anger, but his professional training kept him focused on what Morales was showing him. There, she pointed as the janitor suddenly turned, grabbing Aiden. He recognized your son specifically. This wasn't random. He knew exactly who Aiden was. They've been watching us, David said, the realization settling like ice in his brain. Not just at school, at home, too. The black SUV Aiden spotted outside your house? Wasn't one of ours, Morales confirmed. We checked the surveillance logs. There was no authorized protection detail on your residence until today. David's mind raced through the implications. If foreign operatives had been monitoring his home, what else might they know about his work? About the classified operations he'd been involved in? I need to get Aiden home, he said. And then I need to check our house for surveillance equipment. We've already dispatched a team, Morales told him. They're sweeping your residence now. David nodded his thanks, turning to head back to Aiden when Morales caught his arm. Coleman, she said, her voice lower. There's something else. The janitor Kincaid, or whatever his real name is. He's not talking, but we found this in his locker. She handed him a small photograph, worn at the edges as if it had been handled frequently. It showed a younger David in combat fatigues, standing with a group of special operations soldiers in a desert setting. David recognized the location immediately, a classified mission in Syria, 5 years ago. How did he get this? David muttered, more to himself than to Morales. That's what I'd like to know, she replied. This isn't just about intelligence gathering anymore. This is personal. David tucked the photo into his pocket, his mind working furiously. Only a handful of people had access to images from that operation. If the core group had obtained it, they had a source within the highest levels of U.S. intelligence. Keep this between us for now, he told Morales. I need to make some calls. Back in the library, Aiden and Caleb had dozed off, heads resting on their backpacks. Miss Whitaker sat nearby, looking shell-shocked and out of place among the federal agents. When she saw David approaching, she stood up nervously. Mr. Coleman, she began, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. I want to apologize again for how I treated Aiden. I had no idea that my son was telling the truth. David finished for her, his voice level, but with an edge of steel. You didn't believe him because of what exactly? His race, his background, the fact that he doesn't come from old money like most of your students? Miss Whitaker flinched as if slapped. I never meant to. You never meant to be caught, David corrected her. Let me be clear, Miss Whitaker. Your treatment of my son and others like him ends today. Principal Grant has already agreed to a full review of Riverside Academy's inclusivity practices, with particular attention to faculty bias. End quote. You can't, she began, then stopped herself, realizing the precariousness of her position. I can, and I have, David replied calmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to take my son home. He gently woke Aiden and Caleb, who blinked groggily back to consciousness. Time to go? Aiden asked, rubbing his eyes. Almost, David replied. Caleb, your parents are on their way. They should be here any minute. As if on cue, an agent appeared at the door. Mr. Coleman, the Turner family has arrived for their son. Caleb gathered his things, then turned to Aiden. This was the craziest day ever, he said, his voice a mixture of awe and lingering fear. Will you be at school tomorrow? I don't know, Aiden replied, looking to his father. We'll see, David said noncommittally. Let's get through tonight first. After Caleb left with his visibly shaken parents, David led Aiden through the now quiet school corridors. FBI agents nodded respectfully as they passed, and Aiden couldn't help noticing how deferential everyone was to his father, the same father Miss Whitaker had mocked him for claiming worked at the Pentagon. Outside, the black SUV's legitimate government vehicles this time waited to escort them home. As they climbed into the back seat of the lead vehicle, Aiden finally asked the question that had been building all day. Dad, who were those people? Why were they at my school? David considered his son's question carefully. The age-old instinct to protect Aiden by keeping him in the dark warred with the day's stark reality. Ignorance hadn't protected him at all. They were intelligence operatives working for a foreign government, he said finally. They were gathering information and possibly… He hesitated, then decided Aiden deserved the truth. Possibly planning to take some of the students whose parents work in sensitive positions. Like me? Aiden asked, his eyes widening. Yes, David admitted. Like me because of what you do at the Pentagon? David nodded, watching his son carefully for signs of fear. To his surprise, Aiden's expression showed more curiosity than terror. So you're not just an analyst, Aiden said. It wasn't a question. No, David confirmed. I lead a counterintelligence unit. We identify and neutralize threats to national security. Is that why we never talk about your work at home? Why you never come to school events? Partly, David said. My position is classified, and maintaining a low profile helps protect both the operations I oversee and our family. Oh. Aiden was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he asked, Is Mom okay? Should we call her? David smiled at his son's concern. She's fine. I spoke with her while you were sleeping. Her conference in Chicago is secure, and we have agents with her as a precaution. She'll be home tomorrow. The SUV turned onto their street, and David noticed Aiden tensing as they approached their house. The events of the day had clearly shaken his sense of safety. It's okay, David reassured him. Our house is secure. There are agents checking it right now, and we'll have protection tonight. Sure enough, as they pulled into the driveway, they could see agents moving efficiently around their property while others waited by the front door. One approached as David and Aiden exited the vehicle. Sir, we've completed the sweep. We found and neutralized 3 listening devices, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in your home office. The house is clear now. Thank you, David replied. Maintain the perimeter through the night. I want a guard on every entrance. Yes, sir. Inside, the house looked exactly as they had left it that morning, though Aiden noticed small telltale signs of the security sweep. A picture frame slightly askew, a book not quite back in its original position on the shelf. They were listening to us, in our own house? He asked, his voice small. David nodded grimly. For how long? We don't know yet. But they can't do it anymore. He guided Aiden upstairs. Get ready for bed, it's been a long day. I'm not sure I can sleep, Aiden admitted. Try, David said gently. You're safe now, I promise. After Aiden had changed and brushed his teeth, David sat on the edge of his bed, something he hadn't done since Aiden was much younger. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you more about my work, he said. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you in the dark. It's okay, Aiden replied. I understand now. No more secrets between us, David promised. At least not about the important things. As Aiden drifted towards sleep, David remained seated beside him, his mind turning over the events of the day. The photograph from Syria troubled him deeply. It suggested a connection between the school operation and his past missions of personal vendetta, rather than just routine intelligence gathering. His phone vibrated with a message from Morales. Kincaid talking, says he answers to someone named Drazen. Ring any bells? David stared at the message, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Victor Drazen, a name from the past. From the very mission depicted in the photograph. A mission that had ended with 5 enemy operatives dead and one who had escaped, wounded but alive. He typed back, "Yes. High priority. We'll brief in person tomorrow. Double the security detail at my house tonight." Setting his phone aside, David looked down at his sleeping son. The day's events had changed everything. The careful separation he'd maintained between his work and family life had been shattered, and now a ghost from his past threatened them both. One thing was certain: tomorrow would bring a reckoning. Dawn broke over the Coleman household with the quiet efficiency of a military operation. David, who had barely slept, was already in his home office when his secure phone rang at 5:30 a.m. "Coleman," he answered. "We have confirmation," Morales' voice came through. "Victor Drazen is in the country. Facial recognition picked him up at a gas station in Maryland yesterday." "How the hell did he get into the country?" David demanded, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Aiden. "Diplomatic cover. He entered as part of a trade delegation from Ukraine 3 weeks ago, then dropped off the grid." David absorbed this information, the pieces falling into place. "And the school operation?" "Looks like it was dual purpose," Morales replied. "The intelligence gathering was real, but according to Kincaid, they had specific instructions regarding your son." "Abduction?" "Yes. They were supposed to take him during the confusion of the evacuation. Drazen wants to use him as leverage." "Leverage for what?" There was a pause before Morales answered. "For you to turn over something called the Blackfish files. Mean anything to you?" David closed his eyes briefly. The Blackfish operation had been one of the most classified missions he'd ever led, a successful infiltration of a Russian intelligence network that had yielded unprecedented insights into their operations. Drazen had been part of that network. "I know what he wants," David confirmed. "Where's Drazen now?" "We don't know. The Maryland sighting was 18 hours ago. He could be anywhere." "He's not anywhere," David said with certainty. "He's nearby. He wouldn't delegate this operation, not when it's personal. We've increased surveillance around your neighborhood and at Riverside Academy. All targeted families have protection details." "Not good enough," David argued. "Drazen is a ghost. He won't try conventional approaches now that his initial operation has been compromised." "What do you suggest?" David considered their options. "We need to draw him out. Use me as bait." "That's risky," Morales cautioned. "So is waiting for him to make the next move," David countered. "I'll come in and we'll work out the details." After ending the call, David went to check on Aiden, who was still sleeping peacefully. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him more heavily than ever. His work had put his son in danger, and now he had to find a way to eliminate that threat permanently. Downstairs, he found one of the security agents making coffee in the kitchen. "Any activity overnight?" David asked. "All quiet, sir," the agent reported. "Perimeter is secure." David nodded, then stiffened as he noticed something through the kitchen window. A small red dot moved across the wall behind the agent. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground just as the window shattered and a bullet embedded itself in the cabinet where the agent's head had been seconds before. "Sniper!" David shouted. "Get down!" More shots followed, precise and methodical, targeting the house's first-floor windows. From outside came the sound of the security team returning fire, shouting into their radios for backup. David crawled to the hallway. "Secure the upstairs. Aiden's up there." Two agents raced up the stairs while David pulled his own weapon from the ankle holster he always wore. The barrage of gunfire continued, pinning them down inside the house. "Where are they firing from?" David demanded into the radio. "Rooftop across the street," came the terse reply. "East side, we can't get a clear shot." A panicked shout came from upstairs. "Sir, the boy's not in his room." David felt his blood turn to ice. "What?" "His bed's empty. Windows still locked from the inside. He must be somewhere in the house." Relief flooded through David, followed immediately by renewed concern. "Aiden," he called out, "where are you?" "Dad?" Aiden's frightened voice came from somewhere nearby. "I'm in the panic room." David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The panic room, a reinforced closet off his home office that he'd installed years ago, but never expected to use. He'd shown it to Aiden only once, explaining it was for emergencies. "Smart boy," David murmured. "Stay there," he called out. "Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." The gunfire had stopped, the sudden silence almost more unnerving than the chaos moments before. David's radio crackled. "Sir, the sniper's gone. Looks like it was a diversion." "A diversion for what?" David muttered, then realized with sudden clarity what was happening. Check the back of the house now. And even as he gave the order, a tremendous crash came from the direction of the kitchen, followed by shouts and more gunfire. David sprinted toward the sound, weapon ready, to find two black-clad figures had crashed through the back door. One was already down, shot by the security team, but the other was exchanging fire from behind the kitchen island. "Drazen is coming for Aiden," David shouted to the nearest agent. "This is just the first wave. Get everyone inside the house." He fired two precise shots at the intruder, forcing him to retreat further into the kitchen. More agents poured in from outside, surrounding the remaining attacker, who finally dropped his weapon in surrender. David didn't wait to see him taken into custody. He raced back toward his office in the panic room where Aiden was hiding. As he approached, he heard a small, strangled cry from inside. "Aiden," he called urgently, "are you okay?" There was no response. With growing dread, David entered the code to unlock the panic room door. As it swung open, his worst fears were confirmed. The room was empty, save for Aiden's phone lying on the floor. And on the wall, written in what looked like red marker, was a message. "The boy for the files. You have 4 hours. Instructions to follow." David stared at the message, unable to process for a moment how this could have happened. The panic room was supposed to be impenetrable from the outside. Unless they didn't break in, he realized aloud. They were already inside. The listening devices found yesterday hadn't been the only breach of their home. Somehow, Vul's people had gained access to the panic room itself, learning its location and override codes. Morales arrived 20 minutes later to find a house in chaos. Agents securing the perimeter, forensic teams processing evidence, and David Coleman, usually the calmest person in any crisis, pacing his office like a caged animal. "How did they get him?" she demanded without preamble. "Hidden entrance to the panic room through the basement," David replied tersely. "Maintenance tunnel that wasn't on the original house plans. They've been planning this for months." "Oh, how did they get past the security team?" "Distraction," David said. "The sniper, the front assault. It was all to draw our attention while someone already inside the house took Aiden." Morales surveyed the damage. "We'll get him back," she promised. "Yes, we will," David agreed, his voice cold with determination. "But not their way. I'm not waiting for their instructions." "What do you mean?" David retrieved his laptop, opening a secure program. "Every agent has a tracking chip embedded in their gear. My son's watch, the one I gave him last Christmas, has one too. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone." "You put a tracker on your own son?" Morales asked, surprised. "Precaution," David replied without apology. "And now it might save his life." The program completed its search, displaying a blinking dot on a map. "He's moving," David observed. "Heading east on the highway. They haven't found the tracker yet." "Oh, I'll mobilize a tactical team," Morales said, reaching for her phone. "Number," David stopped her. "Too many people. Too much chance of Drazen spotting the operation. This needs to be small and precise." "You can't go in alone," Morales argued. "Not alone," David agreed. "I need a driver, a sniper, and someone to handle communications. That's it." "This is against protocol," Morales warned. "If anything goes wrong, my son is in the hands of a man who has every reason to want me to suffer." David cut her off. "Protocol isn't going to save Aiden." "I am." After a tense moment, Morales nodded. "Okay, I'll drive. Turner can handle comms, and Keller is our best sniper." "Good, we leave in 5 minutes." As they prepared to depart, David's secure phone buzzed with a message. "Files for the boy, Delaware Warehouse District. Building 17. Come alone." "They've made contact," he told Morales, showing her the message. "Delaware matches the tracker's direction," she confirmed. "But this feels like a trap." "Of course it's a trap," David agreed. "But now we know exactly where they're taking him, and they don't know we know." And the 4-person team moved with practiced efficiency, loading gear into an unmarked SUV. David checked his weapons one last time, his mind replaying the Syrian mission where he had first encountered Victor Vol. The man had been ruthless then, a skilled operative with a sadistic streak. David had shot him during their final confrontation, but Drazen had managed to escape. Now, 5 years later, Drazen had brought their unfinished business to American soil. And worse, he had dragged Aiden into it. As they pulled away from the house, David made a silent vow. By day's end, only one of them would still be standing. And for Aiden's sake, it had to be him. The warehouse district in Delaware was a maze of abandoned buildings and crumbling infrastructure. Once a thriving industrial center, it had fallen into disrepair over the decades, creating the perfect setting for clandestine operations. Building 17 stood at the far edge of the complex, a massive concrete structure with broken windows and rusted metal doors. From their vantage point a quarter-mile away, David surveyed the warehouse through high-powered binoculars. The tracker showed Aiden was inside, his signal stationary for the past 30 minutes. 2 guards at the main entrance, David noted. Another on the roof, probably more inside. Agent Keller, positioned with his sniper rifle on an adjacent rooftop, confirmed through their secure comms. I count 5 hostiles total on exterior patrol. Standard rotation pattern. Fairly disciplined. Professional operators, David acknowledged. Not just hired muscle. Morales checked her watch. We've got just under 2 hours before their deadline. What's the plan? David studied the building's layout on his tablet. Drazen will expect me to come through the front with the files, trying to make the exchange. We're going to disappoint him. He pointed to a maintenance tunnel indicated on the old building plans. This service access runs beneath the entire complex. Most likely they haven't secured it since it's not on recent maps. And if they have? Morales asked. Then we adapt, David replied simply. Keller stays on overwatch. You take the east side. I'll go in through the tunnel. Turner maintains communications and coordinates our movements. You sure about going in alone? Morales questioned. David nodded, his expression grim. Drazen wants me. He'll be focused on watching for my approach. That gives us the advantage. They synchronized their watches and radio frequencies. As David prepared to move toward the tunnel entrance, Morales caught his arm. Coleman, she said quietly, we get the boy out first. Drazen is secondary. Understood. David agreed, though something in his eyes suggested Drazen wouldn't be escaping this encounter. The tunnel entrance was concealed behind years of overgrowth and debris, exactly as the plans had indicated. David moved silently through the darkness, his tactical light illuminating just enough to navigate without giving away his position. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. Above him, Keller's voice came through his earpiece. Movement at the east entrance. Vehicle approaching. Description? David asked, pausing. Black sedan, 2 occupants. Looks like they're expected. Guards are waving them through. Bull. More players joining the party, Morales commented from her position. Could complicate things, David muttered, continuing forward. He reached a junction where the tunnel split into 3 directions. The tracker indicated Aiden was directly above the rightmost path. I'm underneath the main floor, he reported quietly, moving to find an access point. The tunnel eventually led to a rusted ladder that ascended to what appeared to be a utility closet. David climbed carefully, listening for any sound of movement above. Reaching the top, he tested the hatch. Locked from the outside, as expected. With practiced efficiency, he attached a small breaching charge to the lock mechanism. The device was designed for minimal noise, a contained implosion rather than an explosion. He triggered it and waited for the soft thump before pushing the hatch open. The utility closet was empty, filled with abandoned cleaning supplies and broken equipment. David emerged silently, drawing his weapon as he moved to the door. I'm inside, he whispered into his comms. Status? All quiet outside, Keller reported. Wait, I see movement in the second-floor office windows. Looks like... Yes, confirmed visual on a child matching Aiden's description. Second floor, northwest corner office. 2 guards with him. And David's heart raced at the confirmation that his son was alive, but he maintained his professional calm. Acknowledged. Moving to second floor. The warehouse interior was cavernous, with a central floor space surrounded by offices and walkways on the second level. From his position, David could see armed men patrolling the main floor, 4 in total, plus the 2 with Aiden upstairs. Keller, do you have eyes on Drazen? He asked. Negative, he must be inside, but I haven't spotted him yet. David assessed the situation. The stairs to the second floor were exposed, offering no cover. He'd be spotted immediately if he tried to use them. Instead, he noticed a freight elevator on the far wall. Changing approach, he informed the team, using the freight elevator shaft to access second level. He moved along the periphery of the warehouse, staying in the shadows until he reached the elevator. The car was stuck between floors, but the shaft offered a direct route upward. David pried open the doors just enough to slip through, then began climbing the service ladder built into the shaft wall. Reaching the second floor, he paused to listen before opening the doors a crack. The hallway outside was empty, but he could hear voices coming from around the corner. One voice, deep and accented unmistakably, Victor Drazen. "Your father should be arriving soon. For your sake, I hope he brings what I asked for." "My dad's going to make you sorry you ever touched me," came Aiden's reply, his voice shaky but defiant. The sound of his son's voice, frightened but unbroken, filled David with both pride and renewed determination. He slipped out of the elevator shaft and moved silently down the hallway, following the voices. "Keller," he whispered. "On my mark, I need a distraction. East side, something loud." "Roger that," the sniper confirmed. "Ready when you are." David positioned himself outside the office where Aiden was being held. Through the partially open door, he could see one guard standing near the window. The other must be behind the door. And Drazen himself was speaking to Aiden, though David couldn't see him from this angle. "Morales, are you in position to enter?" David asked quietly. "Affirmative. East entrance is minimally guarded now. I can breach on your signal." "Good. Everyone ready?" "Mark." From outside came the sound of an explosion as Keller detonated a small charge he'd placed on an abandoned vehicle. Immediately, shouts erupted throughout the warehouse as guards responded to the perceived threat. David used the distraction to burst through the door, taking down the first guard with a silent, precise shot before the man could react. The second guard turned, raising his weapon, but David was faster, dropping him with 2 shots to the chest. Victor Drazen stood behind an old desk, his hand gripping Aiden's shoulder. He hadn't changed much in 5 years, still tall and imposing, with close-cropped silver hair and cold blue eyes. The only difference was the scar that ran along the left side of his face, a souvenir from their last encounter. "Coleman," Drazen said, his accent thick but his English perfect. "Right on time. Did you bring my files?" David kept his weapon trained on Drazen, his eyes quickly assessing Aiden for injuries. His son appeared physically unharmed, though his eyes were wide with fear. "Let him go, Drazen," David ordered. "This is between you and me." Drazen smiled coldly. "Nothing is just between you and me anymore. Not after what you did." He tightened his grip on Aiden's shoulder, making the boy wince. "The files, Coleman. Or shall we see how many fingers your son can lose before you cooperate?" From his earpiece, David heard Morales' voice. "I'm inside. First floor clear, moving to your position." David needed to keep Drazen talking. "The files weren't worth this, Victor. You crossed a line bringing my family into this." "You crossed the line first?" Drazen snarled, his composure cracking. "Your Blackfish operation destroyed everything I spent decades building. My network, my reputation, my future all gone because of you." "That was the job," David replied evenly. "Nothing personal." End quote. "This is personal now," Drazen countered, producing a knife and holding it near Aiden's face. "The files, Coleman. Final warning." David slowly reached into his jacket as if retrieving something. The movement drew Drazen's attention just enough for Aiden to see his father's subtle nod, a signal they had practiced years ago in their backyard self-defense lessons. In one fluid motion, Aiden drove his elbow backward into Drazen's stomach, while simultaneously dropping to the floor. The distraction was all David needed. He fired once, the bullet striking Drazen in the shoulder of his knife hand. Drazen stumbled backward, dropping the knife, but reaching for a gun at his waist. Before he could draw it, Morales appeared in the doorway behind him, her weapon leveled at his back. "Federal agent, don't move." Cornered and wounded, Drazen froze, his eyes locked with David's in a final moment of defiance. "It's over, Victor," David said, moving forward to pull Aiden safely behind him. "For now," Drazen replied with a grim smile. "But there will be others. Men like me don't just disappear." "You're right," David agreed as Morales secured Drazen's hands behind his back. "They go to maximum security facilities where they're forgotten." With Drazen restrained, David finally turned his full attention to Aiden, kneeling down to his son's level. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Aiden shook his head, then threw his arms around his father's neck. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. "I remembered what you taught me. Look for an opportunity and be ready." David held his son tightly, the professional operative giving way to the father for a brief, precious moment. "You did perfectly," he assured Aiden. "I'm so proud of you." "Ems." Morales' voice interrupted their reunion. "We need to move. There could be more hostiles in the area." David nodded, keeping one arm protectively around Aiden as they moved toward the exit. The operation had been successful, but he knew the danger wasn't entirely past. Drazen had resources, connections. This would have repercussions. But for now, Aiden was safe. That was all that mattered. The media covered the incident extensively, though most of the details remained classified. Headlines across the country read, Pentagon official thwarts major security breach at D.C. private school and foiled kidnapping plot linked to foreign intelligence operation. David declined all interviews, despite multiple networks offering primetime slots. His only public statement was brief and understated. I just did what any father would do. 3 days after the warehouse raid, life was beginning to return to a semblance of normalcy. The Coleman house had new, enhanced security systems, and while the protective detail remained, it was more discreet now. Aiden's mother had returned from Chicago, horrified by what had happened, but relieved to find her family safe. Will I be going back to Riverside Academy? Aiden asked over breakfast, his first mention of school since the incident. David and his wife exchanged glances. Do you want to? His mother asked gently. Aiden considered the question seriously. I think so. I don't want them to think I'm scared. David nodded, respecting his son's courage. If that's what you want, then yes. But there will be changes. Indeed, Riverside Academy had already initiated significant changes. Principal Grant, shaken by the events and the security vulnerabilities exposed, had implemented a complete overhaul of the school's security protocols. More importantly, he had announced a comprehensive review of the school's culture and inclusivity practices. Miss Whitaker, surprisingly, had been at the forefront of these efforts. The day after the incident, she had requested a meeting with Principal Grant to formally acknowledge her biased treatment of Aiden and other students from diverse backgrounds. Whether motivated by genuine remorse or fear for her job, she had become an unlikely advocate for change. When Aiden returned to school the following week, accompanied by an undercover security detail at David's insistence, he found his status had shifted dramatically. No longer the outsider whose claims were doubted, he was now the center of fascinated respect. Even Tyler Benson, who had once mocked him mercilessly, approached with awkward attempts at friendship. My dad says your dad is, like, super important, Tyler said during lunch period. That he's a hero or something? Aiden shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. He's just my dad. Caleb, still his loyal friend, rolled his eyes at Tyler's obvious change in attitude. Where was all this respect when you were making fun of him? Tyler had the grace to look embarrassed. Yeah, well, sorry about that. As the boys continued their lunch, Miss Whitaker approached their table cautiously. The confident, slightly smug teacher was gone, replaced by someone more humble and uncertain. Aiden, she said, could I speak with you for a moment? Aiden glanced at Caleb, who gave him an encouraging nod. Okay, he agreed, following her to a quiet corner of the cafeteria. I wanted to apologize again, Miss Whitaker began, her voice sincere. What I did was wrong. I made assumptions about you and your family that weren't just incorrect. They were hurtful and prejudiced. Aiden studied his teacher's face, searching for the condescension he'd grown accustomed to. Instead, he found what appeared to be genuine remorse. It's okay, he said finally, though they both knew it wasn't entirely okay. Not yet. No, it's not, Miss Whitaker insisted. But I'm trying to learn from my mistakes. I've asked Principal Grant to arrange diversity training for all faculty, and I'm participating in a mentorship program for students from underrepresented backgrounds. Aiden nodded, not quite ready to fully forgive, but appreciating the effort. That sounds good. And Miss Whitaker added, I've started a new class project about assumptions and bias. Would you be willing to share your experience with the class? Only if you're comfortable, of course. The request surprised Aiden. A month ago, Miss Whitaker would never have given him such a platform. I'll think about it, he promised. As he returned to his lunch table, Aiden felt something he hadn't experienced at Riverside Academy before, a sense of belonging. Not because his father had turned out to be important, but because he was finally being seen for himself. After school, David was waiting in the car as he had been every day since the incident. The routine check-in had become their new normal. How was school? David asked as Aiden climbed into the passenger seat. Good, Aiden replied. Miss Whitaker wants me to talk to the class about assumptions and bias. David raised an eyebrow. Quite a change from a week ago. Yeah, Aiden agreed. I think she's actually trying to be better. As they drove home, Aiden noticed the black SUV following at a discreet distance. Not a threatening presence anymore, but a reassuring one. Dad, he asked suddenly, Is Drazen really gone for good? David glanced at his son, considering how much truth to share. Their recent experiences had proven that sheltering Aiden completely hadn't protected him, but neither did he want to burden a 10-year-old with unnecessary fears. He's in federal custody, David said carefully. He'll be there for a very long time. Aiden nodded, processing this. But there are others like him, aren't there? That's why we still have security. Yes, David admitted. My work creates enemies sometimes, but the security is mostly precautionary. Now, you don't need to worry. I'm not worried, Aiden said with surprising confidence. I know what to do now if something happens, and I know you'll always come for me. David felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness at his son's words. No child should have to think about such things, yet Aiden was handling it with remarkable resilience. Always, David confirmed. That's a promise. 2 months after the warehouse incident, Riverside Academy was hosting its annual spring showcase, an event where students presented projects and performances for parents and the community. In previous years, Aiden had participated minimally, keeping to the background. This year was different. Inspired by his experiences, Aiden had created a presentation titled Beyond Appearances, Challenging Our Assumptions. Miss Whitaker, true to her word about changing, had enthusiastically supported the project, providing resources and guidance while allowing Aiden to take the lead. The gymnasium was packed with parents, teachers, and students moving between display booths. David and his wife stood proudly watching as Aiden confidently explained his project to visitors. The point isn't that assumptions are always wrong, Aiden was saying to an attentive group. It's that they limit our understanding if we don't challenge them, like assuming someone couldn't have a certain job because of how they look. Principal Grant approached the Colemans, extending his hand. Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, it's wonderful to see you both. Aiden's project is quite impressive. Yes, it is, David agreed, shaking the principal's hand. He's put a lot of thought into it. We've implemented many changes since the incident, Grant continued. New security protocols, of course, but also programs to address bias and create a more inclusive environment. Aiden has been instrumental in helping us understand where we fell short. From across the room, they spotted Miss Whitaker speaking with another group of parents. Noticing the Colemans, she excused herself and walked over. Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, she greeted them, her manner respectful but no longer nervous. I wanted to thank you. For what? David asked, curious. For not pursuing action against me or the school, she replied candidly. You would have been justified, given how I treated Aiden. Instead, you gave us the opportunity to learn and improve. David studied the teacher who had once mocked his son. The change in her seemed genuine, though he knew such transformations rarely happened overnight. Everyone deserves a chance to do better, he said simply. As the showcase continued, Caleb joined Aiden at his presentation booth. The two boys had grown even closer through their shared experience. Moreover, David had quietly arranged for Caleb's father to secure a position with a government contractor, a job that utilized his factory skills while providing better pay and stability. Your presentation is the best one here, Caleb told Aiden. Even Tyler said so. Aiden grinned. Tyler's just being nice because he's still scared of my dad. Ender. Smart kid, Caleb laughed. Later that evening, as families began to depart, Aiden was surprised to see Agent Morales enter the gymnasium. Dressed in civilian clothes, but still unmistakable with her observant gaze and purposeful stride, she approached the Coleman family, nodding to David before turning to Aiden. Impressive project, she said. You've got a good head on your shoulders. Thanks, Aiden replied, pleased by the compliment from someone he now knew was a respected FBI agent. Mr. Coleman, Morales continued, turning to David, I thought you'd want to know. The information we recovered from Drazen's operation has led to the identification of a leak within our intelligence community. They're being dealt with. David nodded, understanding the significance. Good. Any other loose ends? None that should concern your family, Morales assured him. The threat assessment has been downgraded. You can start thinking about reducing the security details soon. It was welcome news, though David knew they would never return to the same level of anonymity they'd had before. Some changes were permanent. As they drove home that night, Aiden stared out the window at the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The black SUV was still there, trailing at a respectful distance, but Aiden knew it wouldn't be their constant companion much longer. Dad, he said thoughtfully, I've been thinking about what I want to do when I grow up. Oh? David glanced at his son. What's that? I want to work in cybersecurity, Aiden announced, to protect people, like you do. David felt a complex surge of emotions. Pride mingled with concern. His work had put his family in danger, yet his son saw only the purpose behind it. That's a worthy goal, he said carefully, but you've got plenty of time to decide. Don't rush into following my footsteps just because of what happened. It's not just because of that, Aiden insisted. I'm good with computers, and I understand now why what you do is important. From the back seat, Aiden's mother leaned forward. If that's what you want, you'll be better than your dad, she teased, because you'll start young. David smiled at his wife in the rearview mirror, grateful for her support, even after all their family had endured. When they arrived home, the familiar sight of their house, now equipped with enhanced security systems, greeted them. As they walked inside, Aiden paused, looking back at the black SUV parked discreetly down the street. Are they still watching us? He asked. David followed his gaze. For now, but not for much longer. That night, after Aiden had gone to bed, David sat in his home office, reviewing the final security reports from Drazen's capture. The operation had exposed vulnerabilities not just in the school, but in how his own family had been protected. Lessons had been learned. Adjustments made. His phone rang a secure line that only a handful of people had access to. The caller ID showed it was from the White House. Coleman, he answered. Mr. Coleman, the president would like to meet with you tomorrow morning, the voice on the other end informed him. Regarding the Drazen situation and its implications for national security, I'll be there, David confirmed. After ending the call, he sat quietly for a moment, considering how to use this opportunity. The president would expect a full briefing on the foreign intelligence threat, but David had another agenda as well, securing additional funding for school security nationwide. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Aiden stood there in pajamas, looking suddenly younger than his 10 years. Everything okay? David asked. Aiden nodded. Just wanted to say goodnight again. David smiled, recognizing the excuse for what it was, his son's way of checking that his father was still there, still safe. The trauma of recent events would take time to fade. Come here, David said, opening his arms. Aiden crossed the room and accepted the embrace, holding on a moment longer than usual. Dad, are we really going to be okay now? Yes, David assured him with the conviction of a promise he would move heaven and earth to keep. We're going to be more than okay. As Aiden returned to bed, David turned off his computer and followed, pausing in the hallway to check the security system, a habit he would likely never break. Outside, the black SUV remained on watch, its presence a reminder of dangers faced and overcome. The Coleman family had been tested in ways few families ever experience. They had faced fear, separation, and violence. But they had emerged stronger with a deeper understanding of each other and the world they inhabited. In his room, Aiden looked out his window at the night sky, thinking about his presentation, his father's work, and the future that stretched before him. He whispered to himself, "They doubted me. They doubted my dad. They won't do it again." And in that simple truth, he found peace enough to sleep. David lingered in the doorway of his son's room, the faint glow of the nightlight casting long shadows across the walls. Aiden's breathing had already settled into the rhythm of sleep, but David stayed a moment longer, studying the boy's face, the innocence still there despite the horrors of the past weeks. He knew that innocence could never be entirely restored. Too much had been seen, too much endured. And yet, in Aiden's quiet resilience, he recognized something stronger than innocence, the beginnings of wisdom. He closed the door softly and walked down the hallway, his own thoughts heavy but resolute. The events at Riverside Academy had been more than an attempted abduction, more than a failed intelligence operation. They had been a mirror held up to his life, a stark reflection of the dangerous intersection where truth, prejudice, and power collide. Aiden had been mocked, doubted, dismissed, simply because his truth did not fit the neat expectations of others. And yet, when tested, that same truth had shattered every assumption. It struck David then that this was not just their family story. It was a story about how quickly we judge, how easily we diminish voices that challenge our neatly drawn boxes. In a way, the greatest threat hadn't come from foreign operatives or encrypted surveillance packages, but from something far more insidious, the quiet cruelty of disbelief. How often do we silence someone, child or adult, because their reality feels inconvenient to ours? The lesson was simple, though never easy. to listen, to believe, to give weight to voices that do not sound like our own. Because truth has a way of rising, even through the cracks of doubt and prejudice. And sometimes the smallest voice, the one most easily ridiculed, is the one that carries the warning we all need to hear. Outside, the night was still. The black SUV remained stationed discreetly at the curb, its silent watch a reminder that danger may return, that vigilance must never fade. But David felt something shift within him. Fear had not won. Doubt had not won. A boy's courage and a father's promise had carried them through. And perhaps that is the story worth remembering, that in the face of ridicule, truth endures. That resilience is born not from denial of fear, but from standing firm in spite of it. If this story moved you, share the lesson forward. Reflect in the comments. Whose truth have you doubted, and what might it cost to listen instead? And if you believe stories like Aiden's deserve to be told, stories that challenge, unsettle, and ultimately inspire, consider joining our growing community at Raw Black Stories. Because the world doesn't need louder heroes, it needs truer ones. And together, we can make sure their voices are never silenced again.